Welcome to the latest episode of Talking Events, the industry podcast brought to you by Event Industry News. Today's podcast is being recorded from the London headquarters of event app provider Guidebook. A big thank you to the Guidebook team for allowing us to set up the Talking Events studio in their offices. You can get in touch with the podcast using its dedicated Twitter feed at Talking Events. You can also watch a video recording of each podcast via the Event Industry News YouTube channel. On to today's episode. And in the loosest sense, today we're going to talk about event marketing, and we'll keep it fairly loose because it will become obvious during today's episode why we're going to keep it as a fairly broad term, because there's lots of things that we can discuss and inevitably will discuss. Let's welcome our guests. First of all, Event Industry News editor, but organiser of Event Tech Live for today's podcast, Adam Parry. Thanks for joining us. Ricardo Molina from BrightBull. Ricardo's experience extends to, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ricardo, B2B marketing, how to increase attendance, and really advising event organisers and event planners on how best to achieve their goals when it comes to event marketing.
Yeah, specifically with content marketing.
With content marketing.
Yeah.
Let's begin with your current thoughts. We've been talking off air just before we started recording today's episode about a number of different facets of event marketing. What are your current thoughts, Ricardo, on event marketing? Perhaps what people are getting right, but also what people are getting wrong.
Okay, well, that's kind of big piece of topic. What are they getting right? I'm still asking myself that question. The reality is that event organisers are very set in their old ways. So I would say they're pretty much an old school bunch, and everyone is now doing a lot of email and relying heavily on email. So that actually links back to what are they doing wrong. And I think what they're doing wrong at this point in time is that they're relying too much on email. They're not personalising their approach to their market, and they don't necessarily have the time. Event marketeers don't have the time to think, innovate, and do all the funky, cool stuff. So, on that note, it's not their fault, by the way. I am an event marketeer, and I'm talking here in the name of event marketeers. They do not have the time to do all the cool stuff, because their bosses do not support them. Their bosses, all they want them to do is just to focus on generating the attendance with crappy databases that are probably 4, 5, 7 years old, and their solution to drive more event attendance is just churn out more emails, which I think that's totally wrong.
Let's bring you in here now, Adam, because Ricardo mentions about organisers being set in their ways. I don't think you could fall into that category so much, given that Event Tech Live will run for the second time this year.
That's correct,
The Event Technology Awards, which had a live conference element to it in its first year, will run for its third time this year. So really we're talking about something that's still relatively new. So as an organiser yourself, but as a relatively new organiser, what did you look to achieve in that first year? How did you look to go about doing it? Because arguably you're not set in your ways, because there are no ways.
No, we're not set in our ways. Like you say, we are relatively new to being an organiser. But I think because we're new and we're probably a little bit less experienced, we've fallen in some way into what Ricardo said, which is using emails quite a bit. Especially leading up to the event, there is quite a bit of content to try and share with your audience. You have sessions, you have speakers, you have a duty to your exhibitors to showcase them and sponsors, etc. So there's a series or a number of, I suppose, marketing opportunities around those that needs to be done, and email marketing for that is actually really, really good. We're in a slightly different position maybe to other event marketers, as we have a publication that's specific to the sector, so we're quite fortunate in that, we have an audience. We have 38,000 followers on Twitter, we have people opting into our e-newsletter. We know that they are interested in the subject matter that is at Event Tech Live, so we're fortunate in that sense. And we have focused quite heavily on social media. We try and engage as much as we can with our audience. But actually, there isn't a huge amount of information out there or guidance for the event sector. If you compare it to other sectors, maybe finance or consumer shopping, things like that, there's a number of different areas that you can go to find out different ways to market. But we've fallen into that trap maybe last year. We're trying to do things differently this year.
If we divide it into two sectors, if you will, or two categories, those organisers who've been doing it for a long period of time have become set in their ways. Organisers perhaps like Adam, who are organising relatively new events. For a new event, isn't it a bit of a chicken and egg situation? Because to market properly, you have to understand your audience and you have to be able to analyse precisely who your audience are. But for a new event, you might not know for 2 or 3 years exactly who that audience is. It makes the job difficult, doesn't it, for a new event?
Definitely does. It makes it more difficult. I think people like Adam and Event Industry News, they're in a very good position, in a very advantageous position, because they already have that audience. And probably you were first a publisher or a media from before you were an event organizer.
Yeah.
So that what happens with that is you decide to organize an event. Probably you didn't know, or you had a blank canvas, and you're learning every day. You learn. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to get hold of what technology is out there. So you learn as you go along. With you start from now. Traditional event organizers or exhibition organizers, conference organizers, they have never been content providers, and they are at a big disadvantage. So on that note, because they are that big disadvantage, they just don't really have, in the same way what Adam said, there's no knowledge as to how they go about creating and nurturing that audience. They do have that particular audience, but they don't know how to nurture it. The answer is content, and they need to start to become or think like publishers, which is kind of a very big gap. But again, to answer your question, in the other environment, someone that starts with an event new, that has not been an event organizer, I think they have a really good opportunity to begin with a blog, begin with content, start engaging that audience through social media, through LinkedIn. Anyways, someone that starts an event new, they will go to LinkedIn, they will go to Twitter, they will go to the main publications to start reading, engaging first, kind of digesting all that information. So, but they are, again, at an advantageous position because they can just literally begin with event apps that are new out there that are going to make things easier for them. They're going to be able to set up all their infrastructure within a week. And I think that's the biggest advantageous position. You can set your event company, your event business within a week with absolutely everything. There's tools out there, amazing, that you can set everything up from start to finish without actually investing a lot of money. So that's a big thing.
If we're going to bring it right back to layman's terms, because there will be people listening to this podcast who are new event organisers, but equally there will be those that are set in their ways who are looking for a bit of inspiration, a little bit of a way to maybe kickstart their way of thinking. So how could we kickstart that way of thinking? How could we start breaking down into the different vertical strands or the streams, or how would we start approaching it?
Can I just comment on maybe what Ricardo is saying? You know, we have come from an advantageous position of being a publisher, but actually I think if event organisers start to think like publishers and start to think how publishers build their audiences by delivering relevant content to them on a frequent basis, and then looking at that content, how it's engaged, and either developing more of the good content that's engaged and ditching the stuff that's not relevant because nobody's reading it, then fundamentally that is a great way to market their event. I was actually sat with an organizer from a company that organizes about 9 events a year for the legal compliance sector. She's now moving into, the lady that I met, their event organizer, she was only one person in that organization managing those events. She's now moving and using tools to help her become a publisher, to give her audience that she has for those events a year-round presence with them on their platform. Which
is essentially giving her a year-round marketing opportunity, isn't it?
It's all about 360. Dan, it sounds like a buzzword, but it's been constantly engaging with our audience, is constantly marketing, which in essence is not marketing, it's adding value, which earlier on we were discussing about the buyer personas, buyer profiles. In order for you to organize a conference, you need to know your target market. You would have gone through a specific process of understanding who's going to come, why they would come, etc. Now, once the event is organized, all people then switch their modes into, okay, now we've got an event, let's hammer the hell out of this database, let's just broadcast, let's just do all this, and assuming the ignorance, and what really kind of it's upsetting from my part is event organizers and event CEOs of these organizations, they think that it's all about their product, it's all about their conference, or all about their expo. But the reality is not about their expo, it's not about their conference, it's about challenges, pain points that they are addressing within the audience. So if they start talking first about those challenges, pain points, and relate to that audience in that sort of language, in that sort of capacity, then they will have a reason to sell or to introduce their event at the right point, and get people to attend their event. So it's just like, we call it, that's top of the funnel marketing, which is about content, engaging. Middle of the funnel marketing is when you have gained their trust and you've gained their permission to say, by the way, we've got this event coming up. And I think that's the big disconnect. Event organizers do absolutely everything that they need to do to do top of the funnel marketing, but then once the event is ready, they switch on to bottom of the funnel. So it's a bit.
I'm interested to pick up on the strand element of it, because at the top of the podcast you mentioned emails, people's reliance on email marketing. Mm-hmm. There's all these different methods out there. What are there any examples of how people have utilized some of these new methods correctly, incorrectly? I mean, are people using social media, for example, to its full extent to actually market properly, or are they just using it as a means to put some vague information out there every now and then?
I wouldn't say it's vague. I would say it's purely broadcast. So they're using Twitter to broadcast their events. They're using LinkedIn groups to tell 25, 30, 40 LinkedIn groups, we've got this event, there's an early bird, and they run out of things to say, right? So they're complete. I mean, my view. And
then we start saying it in different ways.
Exactly, and they start saying the same old shit in different ways. Excuse my French. So it's really, really frustrating. So no wonder why event marketeers and event organizers are saying, oh, social media doesn't work, or we don't get social media. Of course you don't get social media because you're using social media as a broadcast tool and not necessarily as an engagement tool. And this is, again, where how can you get and how would you make social media successful? You make it successful to the extent that you do not talk about your event. You make it successful to the extent that you start talking about the audience and recognize their challenges and pain points and put out content that is relevant to them. So that's, again, using Adam's example, that they're at a very good, advantageous position, which they already publishes. But from someone that is not a publisher, the key is you must have a blog. You must have a content piece, an area where you will host all your content, whether it's a video, whether it's a podcast like this, whether it's an interview that they've run with their potential speakers, with the potential sponsors. All that is a tremendous source of content that they can just repurpose that and add value and share it with the audience or share it with the public. Because the theory says that if you've been talking about a topic on a regular basis, the likelihood is that you will gain someone's trust and you will be perceived as an expert in a topic. And in fact, you are. If you can talk with authority about a topic, people will follow you. And if you are an event organizer, you're in a very, very good position to then lure these people to your event.
If I was to mention one of the things that myself and the team have looked at, Michelle, who also works along with me on the marketing of the event, one of the things we've looked at is essentially partnering with some influencers within our sector and within the event sector who have an interest in the subject matter that we're producing at Event Tech Live, and working with them on exclusive opportunities for individuals there to either work with us on content for our audience so they can talk about what they feel and their opinions of the sector or the technology, let's say, that's being used, or give them opportunities at the event to have exclusive content that they can then deliver back out onto their platforms. For me, these people are really, people are now becoming influencers, becoming really powerful, whereas before it's always been traditional media.
Yeah.
People are now looking to individuals for influence and for knowledge sharing and things like that. And that's one of the things we're doing. Interesting
you say that, Adam, because today we were at a separate meeting. We were talking about, now publishers are organising events themselves. So the any event organizer that is relying on what we call media partnerships or event partnerships are having their doors being closed by the day, because publishers are realizing that events make a lot of money, and then it's a good means for them to engage with their audience. So traditional publishing organizations are no longer becoming that means to promote an event, and influencers is what I see as being absolutely hot. The problem with that is, as an event marketeer, you're not going to find media packs. You're not going to find any source where you're going to find a list of influencers in a particular industry. In order for you to find who the influencers are within an industry, you have to be in it. You have to be subscribing to all these blogs, subscribing to all these RSS feeds, participating. So in a ways, any event marketer or any organization that needs to promote event, they need to submerge themselves with the audience, and almost naturally they will understand who the influencers are. And by the way, if you contact an influencer and say, look, we are attracting this audience, we know that you have that audience, most of the influencers are going to say, yeah, well, of course, that's my audience, that's how we need to, that's how we want to serve the industry. I mean, I talk from my own personal example. Every time I'm invited to talk about event marketing or problems, issues, social media, I always say yes. I always will share that with my blog, with my readers, with the people that I engage with, because it is in my interest. I love talking about all this, and that's kind of that's like the key. Those influencers engaging with those people. If you are now engaging with those influencers, by default, you will not be selling anything. You will be just then sharing that particular topic, that content, and people will follow. I mean, it's difficult to tell an event organizer that has a P&L, they have their targets to meet, and say, trust the process, but it does work. What we say to organizers is, if you blog once a week about the topics and issues around your industry, you will gain critical mass at some point, that you can multiply your website visits by 6 times, 10 times. And that, once you have that audience, you will be able to gain permission to invite them to your event. And it's much more elegant way of doing marketing.
And Adam, I don't know if you've spoken to any of your peers, if you can call it that, but guys who are working in marketing departments, perhaps in some of the bigger event companies, organising multiple events for multiple audiences, different types of audiences, multiple sectors. It's a fiercely difficult job, is it? Because, Ricardo, you're talking about submerging yourself in an industry in order to be able to understand it and market it properly. But if you have got a marketer at a big company who's responsible for marketing 5 or 6 different shows, each one of which is for a different sector, how do you submerge yourself and be able to apply all the different media that we've got now? Because it's not just print media like it was 15 years ago.
I think what companies need to do, and this might be in some sense harder for larger companies, is to empower everybody within that organisation to engage with their audience. So let's take a large organisation like UBM. They will have teams that work around products and specific events, or a series of specific events generally related to each other. They'll have salespeople, they'll have marketers, they'll have the event organiser, the producers, and anybody that generally helps out on that event. Given the right tools and the right direction, everybody in that organisation that's wrapped around that event should be able to engage with the audience. It doesn't necessarily need to be anything overly complicated. It could, there's tools within Twitter. It could be a simple retweet, a favourite, a sharing of some content. LinkedIn's a great place for that. There's communities, Event Industry News has a LinkedIn community of around 4,000 individuals. Great place to share some content, engage, ask a question.
So, Ricardo, do we think that event organisers and companies who organise events need to take a greater overall responsibility for their marketing rather than just leaving it to the marketing department?
Oh yeah, that's for sure. So when you were highlighting those companies, I honestly feel for the marketeers within those marketing teams, because they're already working at 150%. They do not have the time. So can they do that in the way that we've described it? That's a no. It's impossible. It's impossible. When I'm sitting with CEOs and MDs of these organizations, I say, well, you have to change the way you do things. You cannot pretend that your marketing team is going to be able to do all these things about cool marketing or cool event marketing, because they can't do it. So that in that sort of scenario, in that sort of industry, for the likes of IQPC, IIR, Informa Terrapin, the person that they rely on to do all this social media engagement with the producer, because the producer will work only on one specific vertical. The marketeers will work on many ones, which it adds to their frustration. So some companies, I know the fact that IQPC has started online communities that operate completely separate, with the separate marketing departments and doing marketing in the way that it should be done. Terrapin, I know that they've done, and the UBM have their online communities as well. But they, in a way, operate separate. So the big companies, they are at a big disadvantage because they are set in their own ways, and I think that's where the biggest problem lies. Is so much red tape, so much. They're very clunky. I'm sorry to say that, but they're very clunky. So, whereas a new organization, they can just have that what we call velocity. They can just make decisions quick. They can just do everything, and everyone has to muck in. So, an event startup, you will have an event producer, a sales guy, and a marketeer. Between the three of them, all of them have to engage within social media. So, as Adam said, it's not really complicated. We're not talking about rocket science here, but when all of the three are involved in that sort of environment, it makes it much easier.
Well, let's ask the question, Adam. How many people are responsible for Event Tech Live and the Event Technology Awards? What size of the team of people that you've got actually working on that?
Everybody does something. Myself and Michelle work on the marketing, and I'm constantly talking about the event at events in general life. We talk about the event where we can practically do it on Event Industry News. So that's my role. Paul does the same. I'd say across the business there's about 7 of us.
But does everybody have access to things like your Facebook page, your Twitter page, to your email database? Can everybody access that and chip in?
No,
is it a collaborative effort?
Not in terms of access, no, because there's certain areas that you have to look at in terms of security, access, posting certain things. There does
data management.
There just has to be a process of quality control essentially in place. But everybody's charged with making sure that everybody's aware of interesting content, interesting subject matter. Eloise, who's one of our salespeople at Event Industry News, she still engages with that community, even though she's not directly working for Event Tech Live. She will still do that as part of her role because it has an overall company benefit. Kizzy is probably the one that engages with social media more than anybody else because she has the focus, and we've given her the tools to be able to do that. She'll share things that are relevant to our followers with from our exhibitors or from our speakers. Speakers are a key as well, I think, in terms of marketing. You can really leverage speakers and their audience to help market the event, which is something that I don't think a number of events do greatly. They don't give the speakers the tools either to be able to do that as well.
Have you been able to empower your speakers and your exhibitors to actually promote the event? Because I think that's a key element, isn't it? If we're looking at reducing the pressure on the actual marketing teams in these organizations, if you can make the event better for everybody involved, you're creating a wider network of people that can potentially go and market the event for you, aren't you?
Yeah, that definitely that is the idea, but
I think you have to be careful with that, though. I think you have to be careful with, I know you say empower, which suggests that we're going to give them all these fantastic tools and they're going to go off and send information to the exhibitors. Really, really good exhibitors will do that anyway because they know the power of getting their contacts and their audience and their clients to that event. They want them there as much as meeting new people. I think you have to be careful because with some, it could be seen to be kind of like you need to bring our audience to us, and it's maybe a pressurized thing. It could work the opposite way. You could actually get exhibitors and speakers turning off, going, well, I don't really want to do this.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of two elements. One side is empowering the sponsors, empowering the speakers, and yes, there's an element of the event organizer saying we've got X number of tools, or here we go, we've written this email, we've written this copy to make it very easy for you guys to do it. It's just how easy can you make that for them, right? But at the same time, everyone seems to think, and I don't dispute that sponsors, exhibitors, and speakers are the best possible way to market your event. No dispute whatsoever. The problem begins is who is responsible for doing that engagement. Again, marketeers, big problem because it takes a lot of time. So, and it's a very frustrating journey of trying to engage with speakers, trying to engage with sponsors to do all this promotion. In some cases, and where I've seen this being successful, is where the producers or the people that engage with content within the conversation, they almost inspired all these guys to sell the idea. Why is it hot? Why is it cool to do it? The same with sponsors. So I would probably say a big percentage of sponsors, and I would call it old school sponsors, will say, that's what we're paying you money for, to generate the leads. So in that sense, we're not going to do anything. You do the work. That to me is an old mentality. And again, touching back on what you said, savvy marketeers at speakers side of things and from sponsor point of view, they will do that naturally. So I think it's just kind of working with those that really want it and not spending or wasting time with those that don't engage on that front.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've looked at, although we've not implemented it yet, is community leaders. Essentially, you will have people at your event who are attendees. They might be sponsors, they might be exhibitors, but they could be attendees as well who will be big advocates of your event. They will love your event. You'll support it fully. They're spending their own time and money to get to that event. There's a reason they're engaged with it. Those people, if you can find out who they are, can be real powerfully used really well to market the event. They become your support team in terms of marketing. They can feed the information back and to you. Go, right, these guys are talking about this. They're wanting this, and then they can go back out there, and that works for a number of large companies that I know, where they're even corporate companies, and they have community leaders engaging with their customers and their clients, and then they'll put other people in place in different pockets. That all feeds back. Then it becomes the job of the event marketer, rather than to worry about marketing to everybody, to help coordinate those community leaders and support them, which relieves some of the pain of having to deliver everything, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that, and also touching on that aspect of who within the business, and I think everyone is an ambassador of your event. Everyone is an ambassador of your brand. Like, for instance, when you see Adam, you say, "Well, that's Adam from Event Industry News. He's the guy behind this event." You see, when you see Julius, you say, "Oh, that's Julius. He has this blog." But people sometimes don't realize that he does a lot of interesting things, and sometimes if you spot these individuals, they're always very happy to help. So, but everyone is an ambassador of the brand. So, and I think that is key.
Just talking about going back to email marketing, I personally feel that sometimes that's the one that goes to the fallback, is because it hits the most amount of people with sometimes the least amount of work. And the metrics are there. If you report into a board or something like that and say, right, we've marketed this event 3 times this month to X number of thousand people with this copy that got signed off, then that's a big metric. You can start adding the numbers up. If somebody was to report back and say, well, I've retweeted this guy, I've sent that guy a message, I shared this bit of content, it's such small metrics that I think the question would be, well, what's the value in that? How can that really impact the event overall? It's so small. And that's why email's gone back to, because we've got a database of 4,000 attendees. Let's just hit them. Everybody gets the message.
You can understand emails in a way, though, surely, because people are all carrying around a mobile phone in their pocket now that picks up emails all the time. So there must still be a major attraction for marketers to use email, given that people are not just going to pick it up on their desktop computer anymore. They're going to pick it up when they're stood waiting for a train or a bus.
Let's be clear. Email marketing is not the devil. It's how that's used where it's going wrong. I personally feel.
Exactly, and all event marketers are doing it wrong.
And how so?
The reason why they're doing it wrong is because they're using whatever database they have. They're not segmenting that database. They're not talking to their audience on terms that are related to them. And they are assuming that everyone is waiting to hear the message at any given point, any given time. The way I describe email marketing that event organizers perform email marketing is in Barcelona. Then you have the seafront, about 25 bars with playing really cool, funky music. So whichever bar plays the loudest amount of music wins. And what happens with event organizers, it assume that you have 10 event organizers organizing an event on a particular topic. They always feel that the most successful way in which they should do marketing is just do more emails and make more noise to the audience, and they
turn
think
it up louder.
Turn it up louder, exactly, which I think is completely affects everyone. So, and touching on that point, and again, email is not bad, but if done correctly, people will receive those emails in their mobile phones and wherever they are. The problem is, we human beings have an attention span that is now shorter than a goldfish. So it's really surreal and scary. So email is not the answer, because everyone always, again, puts the music louder, and that really does not work. Metrics. It's very easy for a CEO of an event organizer or a sponsor. Obviously, they're gonna ask, how many emails are you planning to send on this email? So when you say, okay, if you've got a database of 10,000 people, you're gonna send 10 or 15 emails. You say 150,000 emails we're gonna send. Everyone feels comfortable with those big numbers. The reality is that if you see an email of 10,000 people with a click-through rate of 0.2%, that is absolutely rubbish, right? You cannot market an event, and you cannot achieve delegate numbers with those sort of click-through rates. On top of that, event marketers are so attached to these databases. A database with a 0.3, 0.2% click-through rate. What the hell are you doing with the other people that are? Just delete that from the database. Just want to throw something into consideration. A database depreciates at 25% every year. So if you have data that has not been responding for the last 2 years or anything like that, it's very likely that you might as well start anew. It's absolutely nothing. And that's what happens. If you are getting click-through rates of 0.1, 0.2, just erase the whole database. You might as well start new. Again, that's going to freak out your boss.
And that's a combination, though, of data and perhaps poor content, isn't it?
Exactly. Because, again, I like to use this analogy. Event marketeers market events in the same way someone that wants to go to a nightclub and tries to pick up a girl and ask her to marry her, or to marry him, sorry, in the first conversation that they had. That's the way event marketers market events. It's not about that. If using the same analogy, you really want to be able to understand, okay, so I like that particular kind of girl. Is she a vegetarian, or does she like steak? Is she does she drink alcohol or not? If she drinks wine, is it red? Is it white? So you need to start building that relationship, that attack plan, or however you want to call it, so that you build that conversation and gain her interest. So there's going to be a point where you're actually going to say to her, look, my intention of me being so interested in you is because I really like you, and I really like to marry you at some point. I'm not going to say, let's marry next week, but I want to marry you at some point. So I am actually serious. And then that girl is very likely to start kind of treating you seriously. And it works exactly the same way with event marketing. Gone are the days where you just send an email, 20 people just simply registered, and then they pay £1,000, they didn't claim discounts.
Okay, using that analogy then.
Yes.
If we're going to identify what wine do they like red, do they like white, what food do they like, what films do they like, what are their pastimes, what are their hobbies, is this then applicable and a good analogy for the different strands of communication that we now have available to us to market events? We've talked about emails, we've talked about what people are doing right, what they're doing wrong, and how to re-establish, how about they go about doing it. Let's look at other opportunities like Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are people doing this right? Surely this is another opportunity.
Yeah.
Billions and billions of people use it. Are we identifying whether or not it's applicable to the people that we're trying to wine and dine to get to our events?
Absolutely, yes. Facebook works for B2B. Yes, it's not a priority, but it depends on who your audience, where is your audience, and if you understood that. And again, Facebook, do not try to reach masses with Facebook. just try to reach that specific sector, and then you've hit it on the head. So I might, with using the same analogy, I really want to find out about what the girl's interests are, and then what she like, what her background is. So I might want to approach her first, face to face. Then I might want to drop her a text, and then at some point I might want to give her a phone call, to say a quick hello and everything. That's kind of why you use your multi-channel approach. But it really stems down to that particular audience. So translating that into event marketing, you need to understand, and you need to create those buyer personas, buyer profiles, or however you want to call it, which is literally a hypothetical representation of that person. You need to understand how old is he, how old is she, what are the likes, dislikes, but more importantly, what are the challenges today in their workplace. So as for argument's sake, if you're organizing an event in automotive, in the automotive industry, you need to understand, like an engineer in a car manufacturing company, what is that engineer doing? What are the pain points for that engineer? Why would he care? What challenges he's facing? And very likely a conference is going to find a solution. That engineer is want to understand only one aspect of your event, not the whole 12 sessions, or so to speak.
I'm interested to see what your thoughts are on something that I picked up at a conference probably about 3 years ago now, and it was somebody who said that the most important button for any marketer on Facebook is the share button, not like. And you can put content on there that might generate 10,000 people liking it, but it's actually people who are willing to share that content is what will help promote your event. This all comes back to generating content that relates to your audience, doesn't it? Would you agree with that particular statement?
Yeah, definitely. It's not the likes. It's who's going to share it. Yeah, with their own group of people, with their own network.
I think it's getting it in front of those people in the first place. And if I was to explain about how we're looking at Event Tech Live, so we're looking at our registration this year as being a key to our marketing plan the following year. We're putting tools in place that allow us to understand who registers through Facebook, LinkedIn, social media. That gives you an indication of their preferred platform. If they're using an email, then that's what they prefer. We're then taking the information that we collect on them, their likes, their pain points, what areas of interest they are, and that gives us our segments. And now there are tools on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn that you can actively target a specific person with a specific message based on the information that you have. So if you have their Twitter handle, you can go to Twitter, you can set up a campaign for marketing, and you can share specific content with those people directly into their feed.
Do more events need to do this, Ricardo? Do they need to plan further ahead than they are at the moment? Are they guilty because of the time constraints of only looking at this year's event and how they market this year's event, rather than thinking, we'll take the hit this year in order to prepare for the following year?
Oh, a CEO is never going to say we'll take the hit this year. He or she will never say that. I'm talking about the organizations that organize between 10, 15 and upwards events. A smaller company, some savvy CEO will going to say, yeah, we know that our marketing plan or our growth plan is probably a 2-year plan or 3-year plan. In fact, I've met companies that know that their first event is almost part of their second event, because that's it's the live experience. Once you have the live experience, and they bring TV crews, they bring podcasting tools and everything, and they literally create the content at the event, at that first event, that is going to market the next event in the following year. That to me is absolutely fantastic. That to me is absolutely clear. That allows them to sell sponsorship packages that have a longevity, a proper lead generation campaign. That's absolutely the way forward. But traditional guys, they have a challenge with that.
Forgive me for moving things on quite swiftly, but I'm conscious of time, and we need to cover quite a few things before we wrap up today's episode. Twitter. The tagline to Twitter from when it was launched, join the conversation. Now, earlier on, you were talking about people using it to broadcast rather than to engage as such. What are your thoughts on how people have forgotten this element of actually using that particular platform to have a conversation? Adam, I know that the Event Industry News is huge on Twitter. How much of that has been born out of engaging people in conversation rather than just broadcasting to them?
If I'm absolutely honest, that we do engage through Event Industry News, but we tend to use our own personal profiles to do that more than the actual corporate account. And that is because we are a news outlet. People generally just want to see the information through. They don't want to see replies to other people and things like that. Although we do it. We get asked questions and we respond to people using that Twitter handle because they've responded to us on that. Where what we try and do is use our own personal accounts. I've got a personal account. Everybody in the team's got a personal account. And they engage with their audience and they build their own mini audience who are already following Event Industry News anyway. And that has more value because I have a face, I have a name, and I have a personality. People will buy into me and follow me because they like things that I share, even though I share cats and my food and all that kind of stuff as well as industry stuff. And that for me is more value. You start to, that can feed into a corporate account, that can feed into an account like Event Tech Live and stuff like that. I think it's better to build those relationships with the individuals within the business. It can be done the right way with a corporate account. I think I would do it that way.
It loops us back nicely into this way of identifying that perhaps teams as a whole and organisations as a whole need to take this collective responsibility for marketing, doesn't it? If what you're saying within your own organisation is that there's a responsibility of the individuals to use their personal accounts to engage with people and have that conversation, using Twitter as the example, then it does dovetail nicely, doesn't it, into getting whole teams to join in.
Yeah. Yes. Again, when you're talking about the word corporate, then it all becomes absolutely impossible. But yes, when you are a small organization, absolutely yes. But I think, again, it's not rocket science, and I think it goes back to, there's another, probably a topic for another podcast, but it's about talent, recruiting talent. Normally, modern event organizers or modern companies are now hiring native Twitteratic guys, people that are very used to using Twitter without actually being told that they have to do it, and they will do it naturally. So in that sort of environment, it's very easy. But if you're looking at a clunky organization, it's just absolutely impossible. But yeah, you normally use your and then again in the case of a publisher, you use your corporate Twitter handle just to broadcast, but you're broadcasting articles, you're broadcasting interesting stuff. So that's kind of why Event Industry News, you can use that, that's fine. And then through the personal account, then you have the other personal touch. But if you don't have that, or if you're not a publisher, with your same Twitter handle, you can do the broadcast or publishing of content, value add content that someone else provides or someone else produces, as well as your own event. But yes, it's a topic for another.
I think indeed it is a topic for another day. On that note, I think we need to bring today's episode to a close. We need to thank Adam Parry from Event Tech Live for joining Talking Events. Adam, thanks for popping in. Ricardo Molina from BrightBull, thank you very much for your input in today's podcast. If you have any thoughts or opinions, any input, anything you'd like to add or share with us, please feel free to tweet at Talking Events. A video of this podcast will be available via the Event Industry News website and on the Event Industry News YouTube channel. I've no doubt that this subject will run into further episodes of Talking Events, but for now, thanks for listening.